For this summary, we will be looking at organisational stressors on sports science and management staff in elite sport. This paper was the one that got me thinking when proposing my own PhD work, and is one referred to many times during my research. A lot of research has investigated the organisational stressors for athletes and coaches, but there has been little, if any, research within support staff. Support staff may be a broad generalisation of those who work behind the scenes in the high performance end of sport. In fact, it's not uncommon for sports teams these days to employ a broad range of staff such as doctors, physios, sports scientists, strength and conditioning, psychologists, physiologists, biomechanists and nutritionists to support their athletes and optimise performance. However, this is dependent on the sport and the resources available, both from a financial and philosophical perspective. For example, the support staff available to a single sport Olympian may differ from those from a Premier League footballer. For this research paper, 40 support personnel currently working in elite sport participated. Specifically, participants represented a variety of sports science and management roles, including 12 performance directors and leads, 15 strength and conditioning coaches, 2 sports scientists and 11 physios. The interviews for this study occurred face-to-face or online and ranged between 33 and 106 minutes each. The participants were asked questions about any stresses they encountered within their role that placed a demand on them and what the consequences for these were, both personally and professionally. Once the researchers had gone through and transcribed the interview data, the data was coded for thematic analysis. Thematic analysis is a method of qualitative data analysis which involves reading through a data set, in this study by the interviews, and then identifying patterns in meaning across the data. Thematic analysis is a common method in psychology and is quite flexible in its approach. However, this flexibility means that there can be different ways of interpreting meaning from the data set. In this research paper, there were 405 raw data codes that emerged from the thematic analysis, and then they were separated into 36 lower order themes and 6 higher order themes. The codes were collated in potential lower order themes, then combined and categorized as higher order themes, and subsequently placed together into appropriate general dimensions. The general dimensions identified were the stressors and the consequences of these demands on the staff. In total, 4 higher order themes were identified for organisational stressors: relationship and interpersonal issues, physical resource issues, contractual and performance development issues, and organisational structure and logistical issues. For example, and in regard to the organisational stressors on staff, a code from interviews may have been blame culture, of which the lower order theme would be organisational culture and the subsequently higher order theme being organisational structure and logistical issues. Furthermore, the consequences of these stressors could be an angry response, which was identified as a lower order theme of anger, and a higher order theme of emotion. In conclusion, the authors identify that while we have an understanding through research of the organisation's stressors on athletes, our understanding of the stresses and consequences on support staff isn't particularly well understood. As the authors note, we know little about the organisational stress experience of sports science and management staff beyond those of coaches and psychologists. This is surprising given the exponential growth of support staff over the last few years. A main finding to emerge from this study was that sports science and management staff in elite sport encounter contractual and performance development stressors, which is also a likely stressor for coaches who may be judged on how an athlete performs. The authors also note that organisational stressors can have various consequences for support staff. Of note in this study is the participants interviewed suggesting that the consequences of organisational demands were negative emotions such as anger and frustration, and subsequently the outcomes of these negative emotions, which may include job performance, mental health and well-being. One limitation of this study was that it does not link all the organisational stressors to consequences. And this is an important point which is acknowledged by the authors. However, based on their findings, the authors call for the research into the development of a multidimensional measure to assess the organisational stressors encountered by support staff in high-performance sport. While a measure currently exists for athletes, the results of this study suggest that staff also encounter stressors that have not previously been reported by athletes and may have additional organisational issues that could have an effect on work performance and those whom they support.